Welcome back to the channel. For those unfamiliar with it, our goal is to build a debt-free farm and homestead here in northwestern Montana. We started with the shop behind me in last year, and this year we are working on the main house, and then we'll start on the farm. One thing that has come up, and I thought it would be worthwhile to spend some time talking about, is do-it-yourself versus hiring contractors to do things, and why and what the difference is and what I've faced here so far. And so let's get started with kind of doing some pros and cons of each. There are a lot of pros to doing it yourself that I've learned. First of all, is that you're in charge of your timeline. That's pretty important, considering, I know right now in this time of year and at this time here in 2022, getting a hold of contractors or laborers or anything to do anything is really tough. Their schedules wear out. There's a lot of building going on, and so you can never know when you're utilizing contractors when they're going to be here, how long they can be scheduled to do things, and the like. So the one thing is you can set your own timeline on when you want to get things done. You're also certainly in control of your budget. That's a big one. I know that doing yourself certainly saves a great deal of money. An example of that is when we dug the foundation here, I was quoted $40,000 to do the house foundation and the shop, and I managed to do that for the cost of the rental, which was $2,600. So quite a bit of cost savings there, and in everything else that we've done. For example, buying the lumber package and all that to build the house. We've saved, to get to this point of framing and everything else, we saved thousands and thousands of dollars by my doing it versus hiring a contractor. There aren't any expensive labor costs. Doing it yourself, you are the sole source of labor, and so your cost is your time and your energy, and that's a big plus in all this as well. I've also found that one of the biggest rewards that I get from this is that it's satisfying and rewarding because I've done everything myself. I can look at the shop that's now pretty well completed. I still have some check-off items to do there, but overall, I look at that building every time I pull in here and know that I did that. And it's all my own hand that built that, so that's huge for me. One of the other pros is you can make sure that the outcome matches your vision. While I have house plans and those things are very helpful in kind of guiding me along the process, there's visions that I've had for this property ever since the beginning. Utilizing it as a farm where the shop is going to go, the size of the shop, the same thing with the house and the direction of the house. And what leaves a place, you can see we have a lot of property around us that is usable for either agricultural, leaving it as it is, or for animals and grazing. And we'll get to that, and as we move forward in the future, and get things like our water system installed, we'll then at that point start looking at planting more trees and possibly bringing animals into the property. That's all future stuff that's coming up. And one of the biggest ones for me, anyway, is that by doing it myself, I get to learn a lot of new skills, and I get to learn a lot of trades that I had never really been exposed to. A little bit here and there, fixing stuff around my house over the years, but nothing to the scale that we're doing here. And it's gaining those new skills and being able to do things on my own that is probably one of the most rewarding things that I can imagine doing. There are certainly cons to doing it yourself, for sure. I can tell you that making mistakes mistakes are going to happen, and making mistakes is a big part of what happens when you do it yourself, right? And those mistakes, as I have found out, especially on some parts of this build, those mistakes can be expensive, and it's ultimately, in the end, though, it is your responsibility to fix those, which in a way is its own pro, because you get to reinforce skills, you get to learn new things in order to get those fixed and be able to move past those. But that is one that I would say one of the biggest things, a piece of advice is that if you're going to do things yourself, plan on making mistakes, lots of them, and be willing to understand that there's expense associated with that. Another big piece of this is because I'm working by myself, This certainly, I have a lot of days where this is exhausting and can be very frustrating, especially when you're trying to learn something or understand how something goes together and you don't have that base skill yet, and you're working on that. Which leads to another bullet point, which is that there's a steep learning curve, especially in building your house, that comes along with this. That learning new skills, such as framing or roofing or plumbing or electrical. Those are things I haven't had exposure to, and so learning those new things is also one of the pros, but it's also one of the cons, because it does take time to learn those things, and you're going to do mistakes, and you're going to create things that may not work exactly how they should. Luckily, in this, I have people that have been in construction for years that I can have come out and kind of inspect the things that I'm doing. And I advise, if you're going to do it-yourself projects, big ones especially like this, that you have those resources available to you that you can call on for advice, or come out to be able to look at what you're doing and make sure you're on track. In a lot of places, you have home inspections. Montana is not one of those. I'm only required to have 2 inspections. That's my septic system and my electrical. The rest is kind of free range here, which is one of the reasons why I chose to live and build in Montana, is because I don't have a lot of red tape and a lot of bureaucracy that's going to slow me down in the process of doing this. But on those critical things, such as my septic and my electrical, I'm more than happy to have those resources available to inspect my work and make sure I'm doing it correctly, because that's a big one. Another thing I would say is that plan on things taking a lot longer. That's one of the things we'll get into when I talk about the pros of having construction help out here, is that it is going to take longer for things. For me, I watched, for example, just down the road, I spent the summer doing the foundation, doing the pony walls, getting the subfloor in, and doing my framing. It took me about 2.5 to 3 months to get all that done. And just down the road, there is a new house build that started out, and in 3 weeks they had it to the same level, if not a little farther than me, actually farther than me, to where they actually had the roof underlayment on, and I still hadn't even had my trusses up. So that is one thing I would say, is that certainly take your time, understand it's going to take a long time, and then also be willing to give yourself breaks and things in there to help relieve some of that. But that is expectation that I would say is one of the big ones in that. And those are pretty much the cons that of doing it yourself. I mean, there's probably a few more that would come up, and as I think about them, I'll try and relay that. But for sure, I found out there are some things that just require outside help. While no man is an island, I'd love to be able to say, I did this from start to finish with no help and did it on my own. The fact is that while the goal is to be as self-reliant as possible, no man is an island. So it required outside help, and it required me bringing in contractors to help do with the trusses, and then my decision to utilize additional help to get the roof deck on and the eaves and overhangs completed. That's a big plus. And I'm also considering moving forward having the roof done by somebody else, just because of time and energy. Right now, you can see we have beautiful weather, but it's hard to say how long that's going to last before we start getting snow. Weather can change here on a dime, and we're just this side of winter. So those are decisions that I'll make going forward. So next up, we'll start talking about some of the pros of using outside labor and contractors, and why that's good and bad in its own ways. So my decision to utilize contractors and construction people came, and for all of you that have been watching along the videos, you know where this goes, but for me, that came when they delivered the trusses, and realizing that my wife and I got away with it with the shop. They were pretty straight line set of trusses, so her and I and the crane operator were able to get the shop done in a day and do it by ourselves. But when it came to the house, it was 68 different trusses to this house, and a huge truss design that certainly was bigger than my wife and I and a couple of friends without that level of experience to be able to do it. You've watched previous videos, and I'll leave links down below if you haven't seen the one on doing the trusses yet. But that was a complex operation, and so my decision was to hire contractors. And there are some pros that I can say I took away from from that experience. And one of those is that they do bring with that more experience, and they were able to guide me through some very difficult issues that came along with the trusses that I didn't have. Certainly, while I have the skill set and have done trusses before, nothing to this complexity, so they brought a level of skill and experience that I certainly didn't possess that really helped out getting that completed. Another thing that most people don't think about when that is that skilled trades, while they have experience, they also have specialized tools, and sometimes more of them than you do. Myself, I have the basic set of tools that I use to do everything, but when it comes to like extension ladders and other equipment and saws and drills and different things, I have a very limited supply, and to do those would be very cost prohibitive for me to buy all that just to do that when I could save some time and money having contractors bring those tools and their skill sets with it. One thing I found for myself is that it freed up a great deal of time while they were working on trusses and helping with that. Freed me up to do other projects along the lines like heel blocking and things that were needed along with the truss set while they did the main bulk of work, and that was huge for me. One thing I also learned on some things is that, and we'll get into the cons of that, is that they can often get better pricing on materials. For me, I was very fortunate that during the time of COVID, when prices were going up through the roof, I followed that very closely and watched lumber futures and managed to time my purchases on the lows as best I could in order to do this cost savings. I also signed up at our local building center as a contractor so that I get contract pricing on things. But in general, when you're at, that may not be the case. And so you're usually either getting stuff at big box stores or having to buy that at retail prices, where contractors sometimes can get those materials for a lot less based on the volume of stuff that they do. And one of the biggest pros and decision makers for me in this was speed of completion. The trusses themselves were not something I could have done on my own unless I had a lot of time and money to be able to keep cranes here for days on end and do that kind of stuff. It's just not going to happen. But like the roof decking, and help me with the decision to help me with the roof decking and get the eaves and overhangs and all that stuff completed, that comes down to really to time and energy. Those are things I certainly can do on my own. I've done them and can do them in the future. However, when you're running up against a deadline of snow and ice coming, having that speed of knowledgeable people that know what they're doing and can work right alongside you to get that done made quite a bit of difference. That one caught me up to where I wanted to be in my project, and it also allowed me to speed things forward to get to a position where we're at going into winter. I believe I'll have everything dried in before we start getting into hard winter. And one of the biggest things is that it doesn't really apply to me, but it certainly can apply to you, is that in most places they can handle permitting and definitely handle code enforcement and working with inspectors going forward. That makes a big difference because they know building code far better than an individual generally will, and so they bring that pro to this field as well. But there are a lot of cons that come along with it, and that is some of that I learned, some of that I knew ahead of time, some of that I learned as we were going, and I certainly have faced some cons in this project. There are certainly some negatives that I came across in hiring contractors to help me out with things here. First off is that you rarely are their only job. The contractor I hired had 5 other jobs going on, so I certainly never knew when people were going to be on site or what time they were going to show up or how many I was going to have. Some days I might have 1 guy here, some days I might have 3 guys here. It just depended because they were spreading their labor across different jobs and utilizing skill sets on different things, and that was a little bit of a frustration, which leads me to the thing that timelines almost always get stretched beyond estimates. Again, The estimate was to be about a week. Ended up turning into 2 weeks because instead of having 3 guys here to just get things completed, we had 1 guy and myself, and that added considerable time to everything. And one of the big drawbacks and the big negatives here is that it can be very, very expensive. I'll go a little bit into that. Is that how this contractor build is that each guy, depending on their skill set, had a different price tag. So the general labor and the general construction guys were about $50 an hour. There's the most skilled carpenters in that were at $68 an hour, and the contractor himself was $73 an hour. So you had different rates for different guys depending on how long they were here. You'd get that rolling rate, and then on top of that, the contractor charged a 28% markup on labor and materials. Luckily for me, all of the materials were things that I purchased, so those markups didn't go into effect, but they were something certainly I had to keep an eye on when buying things. Another big issue with all this was that they were charging for travel time, which brought in a little bit more expense, which for me, in my career, I never got to do that. So that was one of those things that the contractor and I had to end up on the second round of this negotiating out what that looked like, because there was not a set mileage rate. He was charging an hour of their labor and then marking that up 28%, which is something I had to keep an eye on, which leads me to another point. Hiring people is not a hands-off experience. It's not one of those things you can just come in and say, go ahead and get started and not follow. My advice to that is that you keep a close eye on the contractors, what their job is, and what the expectations are for what the job entails to get those things done. Otherwise, you're going to start running into change orders and other things that can be very costly to your project from start to finish, and it adds quite a bit. One thing that really bothered me is that construction people tend to get on a job and they have all these materials and they just are focused on the job, and so they generate a lot of waste. I know for a fact that we had a lot of bracing and a lot of things that were discarded while they were doing the trusses that I myself, once I took back over, ended up utilizing as blocking and bracing throughout the project, where they had just kind of dumped it into a lump sum pile. And I'm still kind of sorting through that and trying to pull out what materials I can. But that is certainly one thing to keep in mind, is that there's a lot of waste generated that I don't do when I am building on my own. I try to utilize every inch of material and try to be cost effective. And that was a big downturn in that. And for me, there were some other issues that, with the trusses, they reversed one truss, and so that has created a problem I'm gonna have to fix in the future. So it's things like that, just keeping an eye on that are negatives in your project by hiring labor. You certainly gain quite a few pluses, but you also have to be very aware of the negatives, because they can cost you quite a bit. Just to be in all honest with the channel and all of you, the trusses and the roof decking and all the additional help, because of all of the subsequent costs and all that, ended up costing us around $16,000 to have all that additional labor and time here. So again, you can see the cost savings in doing it yourself. That would have been free. The drawback to that is it would have taken me months to get that stuff done, pushing me clear into winter to get that done. You're down to that triple constraint of construction, of time, money, and materials. And in this respect, I ended up spending more money in order to gain speed of time in getting things completed. So those are all things you have to keep in context when you're doing that. Overall, I've had pretty good experience with having the hired help to help me out here. It certainly brought my project to a considerable pace that I needed to get to, and it got me a lot farther in this. I mean, as you can see, we got the roof decked and on, and we've got all the walls, and all that was done by myself. But getting these trusses in and getting the roof deck on could save me a considerable amount of time. This has been it's certainly a learning experience, and I'm glad that I got the help. But you have to keep in mind all of the things that take place as far as the negatives and the positives of getting that. Again, my goal here is to be as self-reliant as possible, but I also know when to reach out and get help and utilize that help in areas that are most effective for my project overall. Because in the end, that money that we're saving, Our goal is to be, at the end of this, is to be debt-free and to be in a financial position of power. While we're spending money on some things, now that frees me up to utilize my skills on other areas to save us additional money on this project and overall on this entire deal to get us towards our final goal. Hopefully this video kind of helped you out in deciding on some pros and cons of both doing it yourself and by hiring people to help you out in your project. Overall, I certainly advocate for doing it yourself and doing it as much as you can. It's a rewarding experience, and you get a lot out of it. But also know when it's time to bring in people to help you get things completed in a timely manner, especially if it's areas that are a skill set that may take you a long time to master or requires inspections or permitting that you can't handle on your own. Anyway, if you like this type of thing, please remember to like and subscribe. Click the bell down below for notifications on when new videos are uploaded. And please make sure to leave some comments. I love getting them, and I've gained a lot and used a lot of those comments to help me move forward. Anyway, thanks for watching.